No, and thank you, Joe Lugalla, for helping us out again.
You can open it.
Okay, I will, because it's hard to read otherwise.
Why don't we start with a brief prayer? The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Dear Lord, thank you once again for giving us the chance to come together, and thank you for allowing and having Joe Lugalla and his family come to New Hampshire and be the catalyst for establishing a wonderful outreach in Tanzania and Saharan in particular. And bless all those in our church on this Memorial Day and those who have gone before. Amen. Amen. Joe, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I thought today I should probably discuss with people about HIV AIDS in general in sub-Saharan Africa. If you have been following the news, the United States is cutting the budget support they've been providing for HIV AIDS in sub-Saharan Africa. Not only sub-Saharan Africa, but worldwide. You know things which are happening in Washington, so they are cutting. And yesterday, in most channels, there were headlines indicating that the 1% they want to cut will actually threaten all the successful programs which have been achieved so far in as far as HIV/AIDS is concerned, particularly in the area of care and treatment. The United States has been pumping a lot of money. So if they cut, which they are certainly going to do, it will be a big disaster to people who are actually now on ARVs. So I thought today, people who are not aware in terms of this particular epidemic, the way these statistics are collected is this is adapted from the United Nations AIDS organization. Data, they compile data every year. So this is from the report of 2010. But the report of 2010 usually provides data for which was collected in 2009. So this year in December 2011, the report will include data for 2010. Now, as of December 2009, adults and children estimated to be living with HIV/AIDS at a global scale were 33.3 million. Now, I'm showing you these global statistics by continents, but see the share of sub-Saharan Africa. Of the 33.3 million people who were living with HIV/AIDS in 2009, 22.5 million were in sub-Saharan Africa. The number of adults and children who were newly infected with HIV in that particular year, worldwide it was 2.6 million, but 1.8 of those 2.6 were from sub-Saharan Africa. And in most cases, it's through what is known as the mother-to-child transmission. Either children end up being infected because the mother is infected, or sometimes they are born without the virus, although the mother is infected, but during the process of breastfeeding, they become infected. So in 2009, 1.8 million of those infections happened in sub-Saharan Africa. And remember, when we are talking of Africa, we are talking of sub-Saharan Africa, which is black Africa. It doesn't actually include countries like Egypt, Libya, Morocco, Algeria also. It's Africa south of the Sahara. Now, in the same year, it's estimated that adults and children who died as a result of HIV/AIDS were 1.8 million, and about 1.3 million were from sub-Saharan Africa. So if you look at the magnitude and features of AIDS in sub-Saharan Africa, the situation is appalling. Sub-Saharan Africa is the home of almost 5% of the world population, but it actually accommodates more than 60% of global AIDS cases. And 70% of new infections in 2009 were in Sub-Saharan Africa. It has been more or less the same trend since the last 10 years. And that almost more than 75, 3/4 of global deaths due to HIV AIDS in 2009 were in Sub-Saharan Africa, and about 60% of the 22 million AIDS cases in Sub-Saharan Africa are women. So women tend to be more vulnerable to HIV infection than men, and there are reasons. And that the main mode of transmission of HIV AIDS is not intravenous drug use and people sharing needles, but almost more than 80% of infections are a result of heterosexual sex relationships followed by mother-to-child transmission. And in rare cases, some people become infected as a result of unscreened blood transfusion. So, at the center of HIV/AIDS in Sub-Saharan Africa is sex, sexuality, and sexual behavior. And most of us have argued that any intervention which does not focus in that particular area is very likely to fail. And one important thing is that the moment you enter into that particular area of sex, sexuality, and sexual behavior, then what becomes central is culture, people's ways of life, people's attitude towards sexuality and sexual relationship. If you understand those, then you can actually understand why HIV/AIDS has been spreading very, very fast in this particular continent. Now, in terms of impact of HIV/AIDS, it has destroyed the reproductive capacity of communities and families. There are so many areas where young people, remember HIV/AIDS is attacking between 15 to 39 to 45. These are the populations that are so vulnerable. And these are younger people, newly married, or they are in intimate relationships. They are also in the productive labor force. And these are the people who are perishing. And when they perish, the dynamics of relationships change in the sense that in some communities you end up having older people who are 60, 70 and above becoming parents again. Now I have been in areas where I have seen a mother, a grandmother who is 85 years old, taking care of 36 grandchildren. Yeah. And she's poor. It's a reality. Just imagine, African families are big. So imagine you had probably a family with 5 boys and probably 3 girls, children. The 5 boys are married. The 3 girls are also married. The 5 boys are infected. They have died, and each probably, one boy who was married has probably 3 or 4 kids. And he's dead, his wife is dead. The daughters who were also married have died. Their husbands are also dead. And probably each daughter had 3 or 4 children. And the government doesn't have a safety net to take care of those orphans. So as a grandmother or grandfather, you are stuck. So we have such a kind of cases where you see older people and people who are now dealing with the way children are growing, are trying to study what does it mean in terms of the welfare of children in a situation where children now have to be socialized and raised by people who are 90 years old. What does that mean in terms of their growing up? What does that mean in terms of these elders who are now beginning to become parents again? So you end up seeing a situation where the reproductive and productive capacities of communities and families have been destroyed as a result of this particular epidemic. We have in some areas child-headed households. There are many. Actually in the Iringa region, Makete district, where Ras and Dot went, is the leading district in the world, not only in Tanzania, in the world, with HIV AIDS orphans. That's one. It's also the leading district in the world with child-headed households. That you end up seeing a child who is probably 12 years old has opted to abandon school in order to take care of the siblings who are probably 3, 6, or 8 years old. So this young lady or young man has to work, do casual labor in order to help the younger ones, because there is no one to take care of them. Even organizations that deal with orphans are so frustrated because their funds are limited and therefore they cannot be able to take in so many orphans. If you talk to the country, the government of Tanzania has only one orphanage. Only one. And it's based in Dar es Salaam. And its capacity is not more than 50 kids. So all these orphans which we have to be probably taken care of by non-governmental organizations or by extended families. And some extended families are so poor, overstretched, that they cannot be able to accommodate these other new children. So, at the same time, HIV/AIDS has ended up cutting life expectancy from so many countries, from 50 to 44 or below. Right now in Tanzania, the life expectancy is probably 47. I'm 56 years old right now. So somehow, by sheer miracle, God has borrowed me some years. Otherwise, if I was in Tanzania, I was supposed to be dead at that particular time. Roughly. HIV/AIDS has manufactured about 6 million orphans, and this is 70% of children under 15 in the world who have lost one or both parents. 60% of children infected by HIV in the world are in Sub-Saharan Africa. And most of these children who are infected will never live to see their 5th birthday. They will die somewhere in between. And AIDS has put the future population growth and development of Sub-Saharan Africa in serious jeopardy. AIDS has also enhanced the situation of poverty, which further facilitates the rapid transmission of HIV/AIDS. AIDS creates vulnerable social groups, and in a situation where there are no safety nets, these vulnerable social groups, particularly girls, we did a study, and I published a monograph of the way girls migrate from Makete district to urban areas in search of domestic employment, and when they are there, they realize that the amount of money they are paid is not enough, so most of them abandon working as domestic servants. They become barmaids, and in Africa, waitresses in pubs, it's not like here. In Africa, waitresses in pubs are basically disguised prostitutes because they are paid a very small amount, and for them, in order to be able to survive, they have to be good to customers. And being good to customers is so broad. It means also being able to accept various demands from their customers, particularly the men. And that puts them in a vulnerable situation of getting infected. And we have evidence so many young girls have ended up going back home either sick or dead. And it is within this particular context that the tailoring school project, which we initiated, we thought it could probably address some of these particular issues so that younger girls can be self-employed. Now, when the epidemic began, the focus of earlier epidemiological studies on HIV/AIDS, they tended to associate AIDS with risk factors, risk behaviors, risk groups, and risk areas. It's the same thing here. Worldwide, people adopted that particular approach. Even in the United States, people think that people who are sharing needles are at risk, people who are homosexuals are at risk, particularly if they are not having protective sex. Those studies also identified other facilitating factors such as sexually transmitted diseases. Nowadays they call them as sexual tract infections. This particular concept of sexually transmitted diseases is disappearing. People are adopting a new concept proposed by WHO, STIs, sexual tract infections, that infections which end up attacking sexual organs. You might get them through sexual relationships, but you can also probably become infected, not necessarily because you have been involved in sexual relationships, but probably you touched an area where someone was probably sick, didn't wash her hands or his hands very well, and then left the bacteria there you touch. When you are cleaning yourself, you can end up being infected. So they identified those factors: STDs, population movement, promiscuity, blood transmission, limited access to health care, and mother-to-child transmission. What is important with this particular approach is that they tended to focus on individual factors rather than social relations. And the kind of interventions they proposed was abstinence, be faithful, which is zero grazing, condom use, the ABC model, which is popular, very, very popular. A stands for abstinence, B stands for be faithful, C stands for condom use, and now people have added D, which means if you don't want A, you don't want B, you don't want C, then what you want is D, which is what?
Don't do it.
Death. Mm-hmm.
Well, death.
They also emphasize the quality, the emphasis on quality versus quantity sex, that if you improve relationships, then the chances that people might be involved in concurrent sexual partnerships might disappear. People are likely to stay in their relationships without being interested in looking for relationships outside. They also emphasize the need to avoid risk behavior and risk groups. But this particular way, this particular intervention led to a situation where those groups which were considered risk ended up being stigmatized. You had rigorous efforts of introducing blood screening, treatment of STDs and opportunistic infections, and interventions targeted specific social groups: prostitutes, long-distance truck drivers, drug and alcohol addicts. Now, the weaknesses of these particular early interventions is that they tended to associate the epidemic with risk factors groups, and therefore tended to individualize the epidemic. And that individualization of the epidemic ended up enhancing stigma against individuals and groups. Now, when you enhance stigma against individuals and groups, it creates a condition where people either end up in denial, or those who are probably not sure of their HIV status cannot come forward and get an HIV test. Or if they get an HIV test and realize that they are positive, then they don't open up and disclose to their significant others. Now, there have been attempts and a lot of efforts has been pumped in trying to promote voluntary counseling and testing. But voluntary counseling and testing as an intervention can only be effective in terms of reducing HIV/AIDS if people can disclose. Yeah, because if people test, they know that they are positive, and then they don't disclose to their husbands or to their wives or to their boyfriends or to their girlfriends, then likely the relationship is likely to continue in a normal way, and the other partner who probably was not infected is likely at the end of the day to become infected. So about 2-3 years ago, that a booklet which you see, USAID commissioned me and some of my colleagues to study in Tanzania the social context of disclosure and how people disclosed their HIV test results, and the way how those findings can actually be used to scale up these issues of disclosure. The other weaknesses of those studies is that it failed to examine the social and economic cultural context of HIV AIDS. Remember, I told you that since the mode of transmission in sub-Saharan Africa is sexual relationships, and at the center of sexual relationship is culture and behavior, sexual behavior. If you don't address that, you are just addressing these phenomenal forms. You won't address the problem. So those approaches at the very beginning failed to understand the social and economic context of HIV/AIDS. And as a result of that, they failed to understand the role of societal social relations in spreading HIV/AIDS. For example, inequality, poverty, and structural violence. And how these sometimes have a gender face. Gender face meaning that if you are talking about inequality, yes, you have people who are poor and people who are rich. But if you look critically at people who are poor, women tend to suffer most. Even if you look at people who are rich, the relationship among people who are rich themselves between men and women, somehow women tend to occupy a subordinate position. So there is that particular gender face, which is usually important in this particular intervention. When you are dealing with poverty, there is the issue of the feminization of poverty. Feminization of poverty is the increasing trend of people who are poor, who are women. It's happening worldwide, not only in Africa. Of course, the situation in Africa, you cannot compare African women who are poor with the American women who are poor. But even in the United States, studies are showing that as people become more poor, women are becoming more poor. And in the United States, besides the gender face, poverty has also a racial face, race, in the sense that the Latinos and African Americans are suffering most, and among those groups, it is women, African Americans, and Latinos who suffer most compared to white women. As a result of these failures, what we see is that the early approach failed to provide a theoretical framework that could help us to understand the historical and social context of rapid spread of HIV/AIDS. So at least for the first 10-15 years, doctors thought that, and epidemiologists, they thought that they were the champions of HIV/AIDS. They ended up neglecting these other disciplines. And then around 90s, people said, no, you people are wrong. This is an epidemic which is broader, and there are so many factors, social, economic, and political, that facilitate the rapid spread, and cultural, that facilitate the rapid spread of HIV/AIDS. So social scientists like myself now began to be involved in these particular studies. WHO acknowledged that it was now important for sociologists, anthropologists, political scientists to work together with medical doctors in order to address these particular issues. And that's how I ended up coming to the United States. Yeah, I was at that time teaching at the University of Dar es Salaam, and some professors from Harvard Medical School, Department of Social Medicine, came and saw the way we were struggling to address these issues, and they said, Joe Lugalla, why don't you come? Yeah? We think, come to Harvard Medical School in the Department of Social Medicine. There you have a department which is interdisciplinary. We have surgeons, we have physicians, we have gynecologists, we have historians, we have anthropologists, we have sociologists, and we work together to address health issues. Come and see the way we are working, and see whether probably you can get something which can help you in your future work. That's how I ended coming here in September 1993, and was at Harvard for about 2 years. So when we began now looking from a social point of view, we realized that marriage and sex tend to be active to men and passive to women, and male sexual preferences dominate, and that women are considered as objects of pleasure. Actually, in most African languages, A woman cannot say, I have married Joe Lugalla. A woman says, I have been married by Joe Lugalla. A man says, I have married Sapienza. A man cannot say, I have been married by the wife. They don't say that. And grammatically, it's actually wrong. Yeah. Now, sometimes what we say, a language usually reflects social practice. So what you need to translate, when you see that particular kind of a language, you should look at the implication of that particular language in terms of power relationships between men and women. And you'll actually end up seeing that if you go at the domestic sphere of life, men tend to dominate and they make decisions in almost everything. And that preferences of men tend to prevail. And that's why you see a situation where women become so vulnerable. Even if you introduce condoms, women don't have the power to negotiate safer sexual encounters. Even when they know that the husband is probably messing up around with so many other men, it's very, very difficult for women to enforce the husband to use protective gears in intimate relationships. So, if you want to make sure that you save women, interventions must be accompanied with the processes of empowering women. Now, how do you empower women socially, economically, and politically? That's another issue. Programs need to be established that focus at empowering women so that at the end of the day, women are not simply economically dependent on men, but they can also be able, once they have that particular power, be able to decide if they are in a relationship which is not working or they are in a relationship which is unsafe. They should be able to opt out. We also ended up learning that sex marriage is associated with procreation. In Western societies, sex is also associated with leisure. In African countries, it's not. Yeah. And that's why even African countries have strict regulations. If you are involved in intimate relationships, you become pregnant, abortion is illegal. And for them, the idea is that you can't start telling us that you have the right to carry out abortion, according to them. Because you decided to have sex, and it was unprotected sex, and this is the consequence, so you have to live with it. So you see a situation where sex, marriage is associated with procreation. In the United States, people can get married and decide that we are not going to have children. Or we shall have children 5 years later. In Africa, no. In Africa, once you are married, people begin to start looking at you after 9-10 months. Yeah? And if they see nothing is happening to your wife, they can tolerate the first 1 year. The second 1 year, actually, assuming that you were married, yeah, I hope you are married, probably. I'm not sure.
June 25th.
So, they would wait. They would wait for the next 1 year. They see the wife is not pregnant. The second year, actually, you are sisters. And your parents will start asking you, say, what's happening? What's happening? Because for them, once you are married, the next thing that follows is procreation. Babies have to be created. Now, if you have traditions that believe strongly in such issues, both men and women, enforcing condom use is not easy in any relationship. It's not easy. Then you have the issue of polygamy, widow inheritance, sex with in-laws. It's so common in African societies. Polygamy, then you have rituals of widow cleansing. In Kenya, the Jaluos, the Obama ethnic group, the Jaluos, they have people whom they call the Jacowenis. If a woman loses a husband, they have a mourning period of about 3 months. when the mourning period ends, so that the woman is allowed either to enter into relationship with other people, she has to be cleansed first. And people know, experts in different communities who are probably good, it's believed that they have supernatural powers of cleansing women. So family members would actually confront that particular man, and it's usually men. They would confront that particular man and tell him that, look, we are 3-4 months ago, we had an episode in our family, and we have a widow, and now we think it is high time the widow can get married, so can you please cleanse her? It's a job, and he's paid money. But cleansing involves also having sex with the widow. Now, assume the husband died of HIV AIDS. It's very likely that probably the wife is also infected with HIV. Let us assume this expert of cleansing is not HIV positive. But almost 90% of the time, these traditional medicine people in Africa have probably 5 or 6 or 10 wives because of the power they command in communities. So assume that he's not HIV positive. In the process of cleansing the woman, he can end up being infected. And then he can infect his 10 wives. And probably because he has 10 wives, he doesn't satisfy them. There are probably 1 or 2 wives who are probably also having relationships with other people. So you can end up seeing the cobweb, the cobweb of sex networking. Sex networking is not only in computers, but we use that particular concept also in HIV AIDS. The cobweb of sex networking can lead to a situation where the entire community can perish. We have also seen studies referring to different sexual styles. Sexual styles in Uganda, in Kenya, in Zambia, they are completely different. Some of these sexual styles, you have areas where people sometimes prefer what is considered as wet sex, the other prefer what is considered as dry sex, and studies have shown that these different kind of sexual styles have a lot of implication in terms of transmission of the virus. Look at this old man here. All these are his wives and children. That shows how polygamy is in Cameroon. So if someone, either him or probably one of his wives, strays outside that particular relationship and ends up being infected, certainly he can also end up becoming infected, and then at the end of the day he can infect other wives. Or if he's infected, he can also end up infecting. In Nigeria, there is a famous musician, probably you have heard his music, but he died a couple of years ago. He used to have a group of musicians, probably it was almost 27 women, playing music with him. His name was Fela Anikulapo Kuti. He's well known. He died probably 10 years ago. But apparently, he was having intimate relationship with all his musicians. And when the government heard, they started investigating him so that they could prosecute him. You know what he did? He married them within 1 day. Yeah, he married 27 girls, musicians, so that they become his wives. Because when he does that, then the government cannot prosecute him. So what you have in most African countries, don't think that African traditions allow promiscuity. They don't allow it. And in some places, it's severe punishment, particularly if you are married and then you are messing up around. You can be severely punished. What they do say is that, okay, if you are not satisfied with one wife, then marry even 15 or 20 women, so that at least we know that these are your wives. And those traditions are so common. If you went to Swaziland, King Mswati. King Mswati marries every year. He's young. And he's a graduate of Great Britain. So you cannot say he doesn't know. But he's forced and bound by the traditions. That the king, there is a King's Day every year, and he has to get married. So right now, he has 15 wives or so. And he's still young, he's probably 35. When his father died, his father was 89 years old, but he had 100 wives and 600 children. But when he marries, you have competitions of young girls who are virgin. They win from different states within the country. And then those who win represent different states, assuming it was United States. 50 girls, one who wins the beauty competition in New Hampshire, the other one in Massachusetts. The day, the President's Day, they have the King's Day. Those 50 girls will march in front of the podium where the king is sitting and is surrounded by elders, women and men, and then they pick one. The moment you are picked, then you become a wife. Now, about 7 years ago, they made a referendum because the world community has been criticizing this particular behavior. They made a referendum, and the majority of the people said, this is our tradition. We don't want Westerners to interfere with their tradition. The British are so strict with their monarchy. This is the way we treat our monarchy. So the majority voted in favor. The only thing is that if a girl who is picked is below 18, the king is not supposed to have intimate relationship with her until when she's 18. She's taken and brought to the royal family, but the king is not supposed to have relationship. About 3-4 years ago, I think King Mswati misbehaved. There was a girl who was probably 16 or 17, and somehow he didn't want to wait until when she was 18. He misbehaved, and I think the traditional court gave him a certain kind of a punishment. If you go in the, I'm not sure whether it's still in the YouTube, you will see King Mswati kneeling in front of the traditional courts, apologizing for his behavior. So the thing I'm trying to say here, polygamy is a tradition which is very, very common. If you go to South Africa, President Zuma, remember, President Zuma is the one who slept with a woman who was HIV positive. And it was attempted rape, but he won that particular case before becoming the president. And when they asked him, did you know that she was HIV positive? He said, yes. Why didn't you use precautions? He said, no, after sex, I ran immediately, went to the bathroom and took a shower. Now, at that time, he was not the president. But he campaigned to become a president, and he won. I think if it was United States, probably it would be difficult for such a kind of a presidential candidate to win elections. But in South Africa, he won, and Zuma is so popular. Now, that should actually tell you something about these particular traditions, the way people look at these particular traditions. To them, they say that is a private. And since Zuma became a president, I think he has married 2 wives or 3 wives. And if you see when he is in those wedding ceremonies, he's almost dressed almost semi-naked. So these are traditions which some of us who are working in interventions of HIV AIDS think are outdated traditions, and we need to change them. And changing traditions which are cultural, it takes time. It's not something which is very, very easy. You need to pump a lot of empowering education among young people so that when they grow up with a different mentality. We have also seen that gender inequality facilitates rapid transmission of HIV AIDS in terms of the fact that men control resources of wealth, power and authority, women are socially and economically powerless, and that economic independence forces women to endure high-risk sex. Women shoulder all responsibilities at domestic level, and marriage is high-risk behavior to some of the women. Preference in inheritance and education is given to boys, and employment opportunities tend to favor men than women. So since the last 10 years, governments, non-governmental organizations, community-based organizations, local and international, are trying to address these social issues. And it takes time to change, but progress is being made. Now, one important progress in as far as HIV AIDS is concerned, which happened about 5 years ago, is the availability of care and treatment. On the one hand, we are so happy that ARVs now are available. And they are free. But not all people can access. The road to ARVs is not an easy road. It begins with people being tested and then knowing that they are HIV positive or not. But testing facilities are not easily available in remote rural Africa. So sometimes people have to travel probably 2 days and walk to a nearby clinic to get an HIV test. Once you get an HIV test, if you are positive, what follows is you are told to check your CD4 count. Now, for the last 4 years, if your CD4 count were below 200, then you are supposed to be put on medication. Now I understand WHO. In the US, if your CD4 count is probably 400 and below, then you are supposed to be put on medication. Now WHO has raised the ceiling that everyone with CD4 count below 350 has to be put on medication. So let us assume you get the CD4 count. Now, those machines, these are computerized machines. Yeah? They are not available everywhere. So you test here, then they'll tell you, now you have to go, a machine for testing CD4 count is somewhere in Western Massachusetts, in a certain district, or in a certain religious hospital, somewhere. Then you go there. And remember, these are sometimes, by the time they test, they are sick already. Yeah? So they travel to another area. You go there and say, oh no, the reagents are not there. Well, probably come next week. We just finished the reagents 2 days ago. Come back next week. Then you go. Let us assume they say, now, okay, your CD4 counts are 350. So you need to be put on medication. But then they will say, before we put you on medication, we need to examine how your kidneys work, how your liver works, how your lungs work. Those tests, again, they need new forms of technology, and in most clinics, those technologies are probably only in regional hospitals or district hospitals. The American support, beginning with the Bush, 15 billion US dollars for supporting HIV AIDS in Africa, has done quite a commendable job in the sense that money has been spent to make sure that these machines are almost everywhere. But sometimes it has been difficult. You cannot put them quite close to people because the electricity is not there. Yeah. And these are machines which need power. And if power is not there, then you end up having these machines based in specific areas. And so many people have to travel. Then from there, if they test you all these things, then they say, okay, you begin taking medication. But you have to be monitored all the time. And then the doctors tell you that, oh, these medicines are toxic. You need to eat well. If you don't eat well, these medicines will actually kill you. So we are seeing these are new challenges that we are getting. ARV treatment is working wonders, and interventions are working wonders. Since the last few years, if you look now in Africa, almost the prevalence rates of HIV/AIDS has reduced by almost 25%. And ARVs has reduced the number of deaths. The prevention of mother to child has actually almost reduced, almost to half, the deaths of children who would have normally probably died if such a kind of interventions are not there. But the presence of ARVs itself is creating new challenges. New challenges in the following sense, that on the one hand, the doctors are saying, okay, it is toxic, eat well. If you don't eat well, this medicine will kill you. So people who know that they are not eating well because of poverty, abandon. Swallow the tablets, and then they die. Doctors and nurses also tell people that, if you use ARVs, they suppress the viral load. And it reaches to a stage where, if the viral load is so low, you might not be able to infect another person. So people accommodate and internalize these particular messages. So when they see that their CD4 count is going up, the viral load is going down, and they are getting messages from experts, nurses and doctors that the moment the viral load is so low, you can't infect anyone. We are seeing a situation where these are people who lost hope. We now say they are born again. Born again in the sense that ARVs have created a new opportunity for life. So they want to live a normal life. So we are seeing a situation where they are back again to intimate relationship, and some of them want to create families. They want to create families because they are now sure that the ARVs are there and that they can live longer, and that they might not be able to infect their babies, and that they might not be able to infect their partners. So these are major challenges, although care and treatment is available, but these are major challenges that we are facing. The other major challenge that African countries are facing is that most governments are poor. Being involved in care and treatment of HIV AIDS is not a simple job. It's an expensive exercise. And right now we should thank you, Bill Clinton, through his Bill Clinton Foundation. He's the one who initiated the manufacturing of these generic drugs. Yeah? They are very cheap and they are provided freely in most African countries. Now there is this business where they are cutting. We don't know what will happen. But the other thing which we are really worried is that the focus now of donor community, they have diverted all attention from these interventions, which have worked wonders and have functioned very well to the extent of reducing the prevalence rates. The focus right now of donor community is on care and treatment. That's where they are pumping a lot their money. And because they are pumping a lot their money in care and treatment, they have forgotten interventions. And some of us are arguing that, look here, care and treatment is very expensive business. We should at the same time not stop these other interventions, because if we keep on promoting these interventions parallel with the process of care and treatment, at the end of the day, we shall have fewer people to treat. But somehow donor communities, they have their own agenda. For them is that, no, we want to save lives, we want to save lives. So we are seeing a lot of money directed in that particular area, and somehow interventions which worked for the last 10 years are now being forgotten.
One more minute.
I think I can stop there, and then if there are questions.
Questions for Joe? Well,
Start.
yeah. Well, thank you very, very much, Joe. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.